World War I broke out as a result of internalized conflicts between nations as well as nationalist pride in 1914. As the war broke out, only men were able to fight it. As more and more males left the countries to fight the war, the demand for workers in factories and manufacturing rose greatly. Now, the role of working men had to be replaced with the role of working women. This major shift in the working role of women, from only housewives and teachers to working in factories producing planes, ammunition, and military firearms, brought with itself a societal shift in the role of women in the same societies. As mentioned previously, the demand for a workforce could only be replaced by working women. The incorporation of women in the workforce began with work in factories, producing everything from textile to working in airplane manufacturing and producing ammunition. And by 1917, 80% of all military ammunition and firearms had been produced by women in factories. The major shift in the makeup of the city's populations created issues for the governments, however. Even though women were working in factories and doing typical quote unquote male work, the governments were still very much oppressive in the way they reorganized their lives, from rationing their food to ordering a certain number of women to remain at home, while others were recruited with propaganda to join in on the war efforts. Perhaps unsurprisingly, women did not completely adhere to these newly established rules for living. Across different countries, mostly in the United States and Britain, women began forming organizations and groups that were aimed at obtaining equality in the work they had been doing. The main reason for the formation of these organizations had been unequal pay and lack of political rights. These groups of working women approached these issues with the tactic of strikes. In 1918, the women workers on buses and trams in Britain went on a strike demanding equal pay, initiating the first ever strike for equal pay. This strike grew so big that it extended from Hastings to Birmingham and even South Wales, where the women were led by the slogan, "Same work, same money." As a result of this strike, authorities introduced a 5-shilling bonus, but not equal pay. Prior to the strike, Glasgow's Women Housing Association had organized a strike in 1915 against the eviction of women and families who had soldiers in their families and were unable to pay rent. Armed with piecemeal flour, women marched the streets and managed to convince the government to introduce the Rent Restriction Act. A specific case study showing women's inequality at the time was the chain factory Cradley Heath, where women were paid nearly a quarter of what the men had been paid for the same 54-hour weeks making chains. The women responded to this act of inequality with daily strikes, ultimately managing to double their income but not achieve full equality. Although women experienced a large amount of inequality and oppression, while at the time being forced to do much more manual labor than previously, life during and after the First World War experienced a major change in the role of women. Not only from an economical sense, where employment rates for women had gone up by 30%, but also from a social standpoint. After the war, most women lost their jobs at factories and men returned to their labor-intensive jobs. However, the role of women within families and within societies had changed. Now, families had a much more matriarchal structure, where the woman was paid more respect. Female expression changed drastically, with more and more women wearing shorter skirts and some even pants, wearing their hair in a shorter style, or even having a quote-unquote masculine haircut, which prior to the war would have been unheard of. This small but significant change in the role of women in a society planted the pillars for the future larger feminist movement to come.